Marcus Thompson stood perfectly still in the hospital corridor, his back straight as a steel rod, hands clasped behind him in military fashion. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face, highlighting the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. His gray eyes remained fixed on the wall ahead, showing no emotion despite the chaos surrounding him. The emergency room buzzed with activity. Nurses rushed past carrying medical supplies, doctors shouted orders, and families wept in waiting areas. But Marcus remained unmoved, like a statue carved from stone. This was how he had been trained. This was who he had become. 23 years of military service had molded him into something unbreakable. From the moment he stepped into boot camp at 18, drill sergeants had screamed at him to bury his feelings. "Emotions get soldiers killed," they would shout. "Fear makes you weak. Sadness makes you vulnerable. Anger makes you reckless." So Marcus learned to lock away every feeling, every human response that might compromise his effectiveness. He had served in 3 different wars, witnessed horrors that would haunt most people for life, and lost brothers in arms who were closer to him than family. Through it all, he maintained his emotional armor. When his squad was ambushed in Afghanistan and half his team didn't make it home, Marcus filed his report with the same detached professionalism he used for routine missions. When shrapnel tore through his shoulder in Iraq, he calmly directed medics to treat others first. When his father died while he was deployed overseas, Marcus attended the funeral via video call, his face showing no more emotion than if he were watching the weather report. The military had created the perfect soldier in Marcus Thompson. He followed orders without question, made life or death decisions without hesitation, and never let personal feelings interfere with the mission. His superiors praised his reliability. His colleagues respected his unshakable composure, and his enemies learned to fear his calculated precision. But the war was over now, at least for Marcus. A roadside bomb in his final deployment had damaged his left leg permanently, earning him an honorable discharge and a handful of medals that sat in a dusty box in his apartment closet. The transition to civilian life had been harder than any battle he had fought overseas. In the outside world, his emotional detachment wasn't seen as a strength. Employers found him cold and difficult to relate to. Potential romantic partners were put off by his inability to express warmth or affection. Even simple social interactions felt like navigating a minefield. People expected smiles, laughter, casual conversation about feelings and opinions. Marcus had forgotten how to provide any of those things. He had taken a job as a security supervisor at St. Mary's Children's Hospital 6 months ago. It was steady work that suited his skills and temperament. He could patrol the halls, monitor the security cameras, and handle difficult situations without needing to engage emotionally with patients or families. The hospital administration appreciated having someone reliable who wouldn't get flustered during emergencies or upset by the tragic situations they encountered daily. Most days passed without incident. Marcus would arrive at 7 in the morning, review the overnight reports with military precision, conduct his rounds at scheduled intervals, and file detailed logs of every minor occurrence. He treated the job like any other mission, complete with objectives, protocols, and measurable outcomes. The other hospital staff had learned not to expect casual conversation from him. The nurses would nod politely when they passed him in the halls, but they had stopped trying to include him in their friendly chatter. The doctors respected his professionalism, but found him impossible to read during tense situations. Even the maintenance workers, typically the most social group in any workplace, had given up attempting to draw him into their jokes and stories. Marcus preferred it this way. Emotional distance meant fewer complications, fewer variables to manage. He could focus on his duties without getting distracted by the human drama that constantly unfolded in a children's hospital. The crying parents, the worried siblings, the scared patients, they were all just background noise to him. No different from the hum of medical equipment or the squeak of wheels on linoleum floors. His apartment reflected the same sterile efficiency he brought to work. Everything had its designated place, and nothing served a purely decorative purpose. The walls were bare except for a single photograph of his military unit, taken during a brief moment of peace between conflicts. His furniture was functional and sparse. A bed, a chair, a small table, a television he rarely watched. The refrigerator contained precisely enough food for the week ahead, organized with the same attention to detail he had once applied to military supplies. Marcus had no close friends. No romantic relationships, no hobbies that brought him joy. He existed rather than lived, following routines that kept him stable but never truly satisfied. Sometimes, in quiet moments late at night, he wondered if this was all there was for him now. But those thoughts were quickly suppressed, filed away with all the other emotions he had trained himself to ignore. The hospital had become his entire world, a controlled environment where his particular set of skills remained valuable. He knew every corner of the building, every staff member's schedule, every potential security risk. He had memorized the layout of all 6 floors, the locations of emergency exits, and the protocols for various crisis situations. In many ways, it wasn't so different from the military bases where he had spent most of his adult life. As Marcus stood in that corridor, watching the organized chaos of the emergency room, he felt the familiar satisfaction of a job being done correctly. The hospital was secure, the staff was protected, and he had fulfilled his duties without emotional complications. Tomorrow would bring another day exactly like this one, and Marcus was content with that predictability. He had no way of knowing that his carefully constructed emotional fortress was about to encounter its greatest challenge. No way of knowing that a small patient in room 314 would soon change everything he thought he knew about strength, vulnerability, and what it truly meant to be human. The man who had been trained to show no emotion was about to meet someone who would teach him that sometimes the greatest courage comes not from hiding your feelings, but from having the bravery to feel them at all. The first time Marcus encountered Emma Rodriguez, she was sitting cross-legged on her hospital bed, carefully arranging a collection of small stuffed animals in what appeared to be a complex military formation. Her dark hair was tied back with a bright yellow ribbon, and despite the IV tube taped to her thin arm, she moved with the focused concentration of a general planning a campaign. Marcus had been conducting his routine evening security check when he noticed the door to room 314 was slightly ajar. Hospital policy required all patient doors to be properly closed after visiting hours, so he stepped inside to secure the room. He expected to find a sleeping child, but instead discovered this 7-year-old girl wide awake and deeply engaged in her peculiar game. Emma looked up when she noticed his shadow in the doorway. Most children in the hospital showed some fear when they saw Marcus. His imposing height, stern expression, and military bearing tended to intimidate people of all ages. But Emma simply studied him with curious brown eyes as if she were trying to solve an interesting puzzle. "Are you a soldier?" she asked in a clear, direct voice that reminded Marcus of the way his commanding officers used to speak. No hesitation, no unnecessary words. Marcus paused, unsure how to respond. He wasn't accustomed to children addressing him directly, and something about her straightforward manner caught him off guard. "I was," he said after a moment, his voice rougher than he intended. "Now I work security here." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I thought so. You stand like my daddy did when he was in uniform." She gestured to the stuffed animals spread across her bed. "I'm setting up a defense perimeter. The teddy bear is the commanding officer, and the elephant is in charge of supplies." Despite his training to remain emotionally detached, Marcus found himself genuinely curious about this unusual child. He stepped closer to examine her arrangement and realized she had actually created a tactically sound defensive position, with clear sightlines and logical placement of her troops. "Where did you learn military strategy?" he asked, forgetting for a moment that he was supposed to simply close the door and continue his rounds. Emma's face brightened. "My daddy taught me before he went to heaven. He was a sergeant in the army. He said knowing how to think like a soldier could help me be brave when things got scary." She paused, looking directly at Marcus with an intensity that seemed far beyond her years. "He said soldiers aren't brave because they're not scared. They're brave because they keep going even when they are scared." Something twisted uncomfortably in Marcus's chest, an unfamiliar sensation he quickly pushed aside. He had heard similar words from his own drill sergeants years ago, but hearing them from this small girl's mouth gave them a different weight entirely. "Your father sounds like he was a good soldier," Marcus said, unsure why he was continuing this conversation when he should have been moving on to complete his rounds. "He was the best," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "That's why he volunteered for the dangerous missions. Mom says he died protecting other soldiers who had families waiting for them at home." She picked up a small toy dinosaur and moved it to a new position. The doctors say I might die too, but I'm trying to be as brave as Daddy was. The casual way she mentioned her own mortality hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had witnessed death countless times during his military service, had seen soldiers fall in combat without showing any outward reaction. But something about this child's calm acceptance of her situation created a crack in his emotional armor that he couldn't immediately seal. Marcus cleared his throat and took a step back toward the door. You should get some sleep. The doctors need you to rest so you can get better. Emma tilted her head, studying him with those perceptive brown eyes. You're sad, she observed. I can tell even though you're trying to hide it. My daddy used to get that same look when he thought I wasn't watching. I'm not sad, Marcus replied automatically, his voice returning to its usual flat tone. I don't get sad. But Emma wasn't deterred by his denial. It's okay to be sad sometimes. Daddy said that being strong doesn't mean you can't have feelings. It means you can have feelings and still do what needs to be done. She arranged 2 small horses near the teddy bear commander. He cried when he had to leave for his last deployment. He thought I was asleep, but I saw him. It didn't make him less brave. Marcus felt something shifting inside him like tectonic plates moving deep beneath the surface. This child was challenging concepts he had built his entire adult life around, using words that echoed his own father's teachings about courage and strength. But where Marcus had learned to associate emotions with weakness, Emma seemed to understand them as a different kind of strength entirely. I should let you sleep, he said, reaching for the door handle. Will you come back tomorrow? Emma asked, her voice carrying a note of hope that made Marcus pause. I don't get many visitors now that I've been here so long. And you're the first person who understood my battle formations? Marcus hesitated. Getting involved with patients wasn't part of his job description. Personal connections led to complications, and complications led to compromised judgment. But something about Emma's straightforward request, delivered without manipulation or emotional pressure, made it difficult to refuse. Perhaps, he said finally, if my duties bring me to this wing? Emma smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her. Good. Tomorrow I'll show you how Daddy taught me to set up an ambush using my stuffed animals. It's much more complicated than a defensive position. As Marcus closed the door and continued his rounds, he found his thoughts returning repeatedly to room 314. Emma's words about her father echoed in his mind, particularly her assertion that true bravery meant continuing forward despite fear, not the absence of fear itself. It was a concept that challenged everything he had been taught about emotional control and military strength. For the first time in years, Marcus completed his security rounds with his mind partially elsewhere, thinking about a 7-year-old girl who seemed to understand something about courage that had eluded him for decades. He told himself it was nothing more than professional interest in an unusual patient. But deep down, he sensed that something fundamental had begun to shift in his carefully ordered world. Marcus found himself walking past room 314 more frequently over the following days, though he told himself it was simply part of his expanded security protocol. Each time he passed, he could hear Emma's voice through the door, sometimes talking to nurses, sometimes reading aloud to herself, and occasionally conducting what sounded like complex tactical briefings for her stuffed animal army. On the 3rd day, he discovered Emma sitting in the hallway outside her room in a wheelchair, a puzzle spread across a portable table in front of her. She was wearing a bright red baseball cap that couldn't quite hide the fact that her hair was getting thinner. The chemotherapy was taking its toll, but her posture remained as straight and determined as any soldier Marcus had ever served with. Mr. Marcus, she called out when she spotted him approaching. She had learned his name from one of the nurses and had taken to greeting him like an old friend. I've been waiting for you. I have something important to show you. Marcus approached reluctantly, still uncomfortable with the way this child seemed genuinely happy to see him. In his experience, people either feared him, tolerated him professionally, or tried to use him for their own purposes. Emma's uncomplicated friendliness was foreign territory. What are you working on? He asked, looking down at the partially completed puzzle. It showed a lighthouse standing strong against crashing waves during a storm. It's 1,000 pieces, Emma said proudly. The nurse said it might be too hard for someone my age, but I told her my daddy taught me that hard things are worth doing because they make you stronger. She picked up a piece and studied it carefully. Want to help? You have good eyes for details. I can tell because you notice things other people miss. Marcus glanced around the hallway, checking for other staff members who might question why he was sitting with a patient instead of conducting his rounds. Seeing no one nearby, he lowered himself into a nearby chair, his injured leg protesting slightly. Emma immediately handed him several puzzle pieces. These are all edge pieces. Daddy always said to start with the borders because they give you something solid to build from. She worked quietly for a few minutes, then looked up at him. Can I ask you something personal? Marcus tensed. Personal questions led to personal revelations, which led to emotional complications. I suppose. Do you have nightmares about the war? The directness of her question caught him completely off guard. He had spent years deflecting similar inquiries from therapists, doctors, and well-meaning civilians, always maintaining that his military service hadn't affected him psychologically. But something about Emma's matter-of-fact tone made his usual deflections seem impossible. Sometimes, he admitted, fitting an edge piece into place with more force than necessary. Emma nodded as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. Mom has nightmares about Daddy. She tries to hide them, but I hear her crying at night. The grief counselor says it's normal to have bad dreams when terrible things happen to people you love. Marcus felt that uncomfortable shifting sensation in his chest again. Your mother talks to a grief counselor? We both do. Well, we did until I got too sick to leave the hospital much. Emma found a piece that fit perfectly into a section she was working on. Dr. Peterson says it's important to talk about feelings instead of keeping them locked up inside.
She says feelings are like pressure in a balloon. If you don't let some air out gradually, eventually the balloon explodes. The metaphor hit Marcus harder than he expected.
For years, he had prided himself on his ability to contain and control his emotions, never considering that suppression might not be the same thing as strength. He had always viewed his emotional detachment as a military virtue, proof of his discipline and reliability. Your counselor sounds very wise, he said carefully. Emma beamed at the compliment. She is. She helped me understand that being sad about Daddy dying doesn't mean I'm weak or that I don't trust God's plan. It just means I love him and miss him, which are good things to feel. She paused in her puzzle work to look directly at Marcus. She also taught me that sometimes grown-ups forget how to feel things because they've been hurt too much. But feelings don't really go away. They just hide until it's safe to come out again. Marcus found himself studying this remarkable child with new eyes. Despite facing her own mortality at age 7, despite losing her father and dealing with months of painful medical treatments, Emma possessed an emotional intelligence that surpassed most adults he knew. She spoke about complex psychological concepts with the same clarity she used to discuss military tactics. How long have you been in the hospital? He asked, changing the subject to safer ground. 4 months this time, Emma replied, returning her attention to the puzzle. I was here for 2 months last year too, right after they first found the cancer. But this time is different because the treatments aren't working as well as they hoped. She said this with the same calm acceptance she might use to discuss the weather. Marcus felt something crack deeper in his emotional armor. This child was facing circumstances that would break most adults, yet she approached each day with courage and grace that humbled him. She had every reason to be angry, bitter, or consumed with self-pity, but instead she focused on lighthouse puzzles and stuffed animal battle formations. Aren't you scared? The question escaped before Marcus could stop himself. Emma considered this seriously, treating his question with the respect it deserved. Yes, she said finally. I'm scared about leaving Mom alone, and I'm scared about the treatments hurting. And I'm scared about not getting to grow up and become a veterinarian like I planned. She fitted another puzzle piece into place. But Daddy taught me that being scared and being brave aren't opposites. They're partners. You can't really be brave unless you're scared of something. Marcus stared at the puzzle pieces in his hands, seeing them without really focusing. Emma's words echoed conversations he had buried deep in his memory. Talks with his own father before he shipped out to basic training. Discussions about courage and fear that he had deliberately forgotten because they conflicted with his military conditioning. Your father sounds like he was an exceptional man, Marcus said quietly. He was, but he would have liked you too. Emma glanced up at him with a small smile. He always said the best soldiers were the ones who cared deeply about protecting others, even when caring hurt. He said that's what made them willing to sacrifice everything. For the first time in years, Marcus felt tears threatening behind his eyes. He blinked them back quickly, but not before Emma noticed. "It's okay," she said gently. "Daddy cried too sometimes." It didn't make him less of a soldier. It made him more human. As Marcus helped Emma work on her lighthouse puzzle, surrounded by the busy sounds of the hospital, he began to understand that this child was teaching him something his military training had never addressed. That true strength might not come from eliminating emotions, but from having the courage to feel them while still doing what needed to be done. The change in Marcus's routine was subtle at first, but the other hospital staff began to notice. Instead of completing his rounds with military efficiency and disappearing into his office, he could occasionally be found sitting with Emma during his breaks. The sight of the imposing security supervisor patiently working on puzzles or listening to a 7-year-old's elaborate battle strategies became a curious fixture on the pediatric wing. Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma's primary oncologist, was the first to comment on the unusual friendship. She approached Marcus one afternoon as he was leaving Emma's room after helping her reorganize her stuffed animal collection into what she called a peacekeeping force. "I have to say, Mr. Thompson, Emma seems brighter when you're around, Doctor," Chen observed. "She's been through so much, and it's been difficult for her to connect with adults who aren't medical staff or family. Most people don't know how to talk to a child facing terminal illness." The word terminal hit Marcus like a physical blow, though he managed to keep his expression neutral. Emma had spoken matter-of-factly about her situation, but hearing it confirmed by her doctor made the reality inescapable. "She's an extraordinary child," Marcus replied carefully. Dr. Chen studied him with the perceptive eyes of someone trained to read people under stress. "She is indeed. But I think you might be exactly what she needs right now. She's been asking the nurses if you'll be working this weekend. Apparently, you promised to teach her some real military hand signals." Marcus had forgotten about that. Promise made during a moment when Emma's enthusiasm had overwhelmed his usual caution. She had been frustrated that her stuffed animal troops couldn't communicate effectively during her tactical exercises, so he had offhandedly mentioned that real soldiers used silent signals for coordination. "I suppose I could show her a few basics." "Mons," Marcus said, already regretting the commitment even as he made it. Over the following weekend, Marcus found himself spending more time in Emma's room than he had planned. She was an eager student, memorizing the hand signals with the same intensity she brought to everything else. But more than that, she seemed genuinely interested in his military experiences. Not the glorified version most civilians wanted to hear, but the real details of leadership, responsibility, and brotherhood. "Tell me about your squad," Emma requested as she practiced the signal for advance quietly. What were they like as people, not just as soldiers? Marcus hesitated. He had spent years avoiding conversations about his fallen comrades, treating their memories as classified information too dangerous to share. But Emma's straightforward curiosity felt different from the morbid fascination or pity he usually encountered. Johnson was from Texas, he found himself saying. He carried pictures of his 3 daughters everywhere and could make anyone laugh, even during the worst situations. Rodriguez was brilliant with communications equipment but terrible at poker. Miller collected stamps and wrote poetry that he was too embarrassed to show anyone. Emma listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed her deep understanding of human nature. She wanted to know if they were scared during dangerous missions, how they supported each other when things went wrong, and whether Marcus still thought about them. "Every day," Marcus admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I think about them every day." "Good," Emma said firmly. "That means they're still alive in your heart, Daddy says. Said that's how we keep people with us even after they go to heaven, by remembering who they really were and letting them change us for the better." As the days passed, Marcus realized that Emma was doing more than simply occupying his time during breaks. She was systematically dismantling the emotional barriers he had spent decades constructing, not through confrontation or therapy speak, but through simple, genuine human connection. When Emma had a particularly difficult treatment day, Marcus found himself staying late to sit with her while she recovered. When she was too weak to work on puzzles, he would read to her from adventure books about brave explorers and noble knights. When nightmares woke her in the early morning hours, Security cameras would show Marcus walking the halls nearby, as if his presence alone could guard her dreams. The transformation didn't go unnoticed by Emma's mother, Maria Rodriguez. She had been maintaining a vigil at her daughter's bedside for months, watching a parade of medical professionals treat Emma's body while largely ignoring her spirit. But Marcus was different. He saw Emma as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms and statistics. "Thank you," Maria said to him one evening as he prepared to leave after spending his dinner break playing chess with Emma. "I haven't seen her this engaged with life in weeks. Whatever you're doing, it's giving her something the medicine can't." Marcus felt embarrassed by the gratitude, uncomfortable with the implication that his friendship might have therapeutic value. "She's teaching me more than I'm teaching her," he replied honestly, and it was true. Emma was showing him that strength could coexist with vulnerability, that acknowledging pain didn't diminish courage, and that love was not a weakness to be avoided, but a force that could sustain someone through unimaginable hardship. She spoke openly about missing her father, about her fears for her mother's future, and about her sadness over the experiences she might never have. But she did so without self-pity or bitterness. "Mr. Marcus," Emma said during one of their chess games, "can I tell you a secret?" Marcus nodded, moving his knight to protect his king. "Sometimes I pretend you're like a guardian angel that Daddy sent to watch over me. Not a real angel with wings and stuff, but a person angel who makes sure I don't get too lonely or scared." She captured one of his pawns with her rook. "Is that silly?" Marcus felt something break open in his chest. Not painfully, but like a dam releasing pressure that had been building for years. For the first time since his discharge from the military, he felt genuinely needed, not just for his skills or professional competence, but for who he was as a human being. "No," he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. "That's not silly at all." Emma smiled and continued studying the chessboard, apparently unaware that she had just given Marcus something he hadn't realized he was desperately missing. A sense of purpose that went beyond mere duty, a reason to care about another person's well-being that had nothing to do with military orders or professional obligations. As Marcus helped Emma plan her next chess move, he began to understand that this child had become far more than an interesting patient or a pleasant distraction during his workday. She had become the key to unlocking parts of himself that he had thought were permanently sealed away, teaching him that the greatest battles weren't always fought on distant battlefields, but sometimes in hospital rooms where a 7-year-old girl faced impossible odds with more courage than most soldiers. He had known. The crisis came on a Tuesday evening in late autumn. Marcus was completing his final security rounds when he heard urgent voices from the pediatric wing. As he approached Emma's floor, he saw Dr. Chen rushing toward room 314 with 2 nurses, their expressions grim and focused. Marcus quickened his pace, his injured leg protesting as he pushed himself faster than usual. Through Emma's doorway, he could see a flurry of medical activity, monitors beeping rapidly, IV bags being replaced, and Emma's small form nearly lost among the medical equipment surrounding her bed. "What's happening?" Marcus asked a nurse who emerged from the room, though part of him already knew the answer from the gravity of everyone's expressions. "Her condition has deteriorated rapidly," the nurse explained quietly. "Dr. Chen is trying to stabilize her, but—" She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Marcus stood in the hallway, watching the medical team work with the same professional efficiency he had once brought to combat situations. But unlike his military experiences, he felt completely helpless here. There was no enemy to engage, no tactical advantage to exploit, no mission parameters he could follow to ensure a successful outcome. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Dr. Chen emerged from Emma's room. Her usually composed expression showed cracks of exhaustion and frustration. "We've stabilized her for now," she told Marcus. "But her family should be prepared. We've called her mother and she's on her way." Dr. Chen paused, studying Marcus's face. "Emma has been asking for you. She's conscious but very weak. If you'd like to see her." Marcus nodded, unsure if he could trust his voice to respond verbally. He entered the room quietly, struck immediately by how small and fragile Emma looked connected to all the medical machinery. Her red baseball cap sat on the bedside table, and her stuffed animal army had been carefully arranged by the nurses to remain visible from her bed. Emma's eyes opened when she heard his footsteps. Despite her obvious weakness, she managed a small smile when she saw him. "Mr. Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the humming of medical equipment. "I was hoping you'd come." Marcus pulled a chair close to her bed, closer than hospital protocol typically allowed, but no one seemed inclined to enforce normal rules tonight. "How are you feeling?" he asked, though the question felt inadequate given the circumstances. "Tired," Emma admitted. "Really, really tired. Like when you've been marching for days and your pack feels heavier than you can carry." She paused to catch her breath. "But I'm not scared. Not with you here." Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. For weeks he had watched this remarkable child face her illness with more courage than most grown men displayed in combat. Now, seeing her fight for each breath while still trying to comfort him, he understood what real bravery looked like. "Emma," he said softly, "I need to tell you something important." She turned her head slightly to look at him more directly, her brown eyes still bright despite her physical weakness. "You've taught me more about being a soldier than 23 years in the military ever did," Marcus continued, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "You've shown me that real courage isn't about not feeling scared or sad. It's about feeling those things and still choosing to love people anyway." Emma's smile widened slightly. "Daddy would be so proud to hear you say that. He always believed the best soldiers were the ones who understood that fighting isn't really about destroying things. It's about protecting the people and things you love." Before Marcus could respond, Maria Rodriguez arrived, still wearing her work uniform from the diner where she had been pulling double shifts to pay medical bills. She rushed to Emma's side, taking her daughter's hand and speaking quietly in Spanish before switching back to English. "Mia, how are you feeling? Are you in pain? Do you need anything?" Emma squeezed her mother's hand weakly. "I'm okay, Mama. Mr. Marcus has been keeping me company just like Daddy used to." Maria looked across the bed at Marcus, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Over the past weeks, she had watched this stoic man gradually become an important part of her daughter's daily life. She had seen Emma light up when he entered the room, had witnessed conversations between them that seemed to give Emma strength when medical treatments failed her. "Thank you," Maria said simply. But the words carried the weight of a mother's infinite gratitude for someone who had brought joy to her child's darkest hours. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself in uncharted emotional territory. He had sat vigil over wounded soldiers before, had held the hands of dying men who whispered final messages for their families. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield casualty or a military operation gone wrong. This was a child whose only crime was being born into a world where terrible things sometimes happen to innocent people. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness throughout the night, but whenever she was awake, she seemed most peaceful when Marcus was nearby. He told her stories about his military travels, describing beautiful places he had seen during peacetime deployments: cherry blossoms in Japan, northern lights in Alaska, ancient ruins in Germany. He painted word pictures of the world beyond the hospital walls, places where she could imagine her spirit traveling freely. Near dawn, Emma stirred and looked around the room with unusual alertness. "Mr. Marcus," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in hours, "will you help me with one last mission?" Marcus leaned closer. "Of course. What do you need?" Emma gestured weakly toward her stuffed animal collection. "I want to make sure they have good homes when I'm not here to take care of them anymore. Each one should go to a child who needs a brave friend." The request was so typical of Emma. Even facing her own mortality, she was thinking about how to help others. Marcus carefully gathered the stuffed animals, bringing them close to her bed so she could give specific instructions about each one. "The teddy bear commander should go to someone who feels scared at night," she explained. "He's very good at standing guard. The elephant is perfect for a child who feels different from everyone else because elephants are special and strong. The horses should stay together. They're a team." As Emma made arrangements for her beloved companions, Marcus realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. This child was teaching him that love didn't end with death. It transformed, becoming something that could continue to bring comfort and hope long after the person was gone. When Emma finished her instructions, she looked up at Marcus with eyes that seemed far too wise for her 7 years. "Will you promise me something?" Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Promise me you won't go back to hiding your feelings after I'm gone. The world needs people like you who care deeply even when caring hurts. Especially when caring hurts. Marcus felt tears he had suppressed for decades finally breaking free, rolling down his weathered face without shame or apology. I promise, he whispered. Emma smiled one last time, an expression of pure peace and contentment. Good. Daddy always said the best promises are the ones that make you brave enough to become who you're supposed to be. Emma Rodriguez passed away peacefully on a Wednesday morning as the first light of dawn filtered through her hospital room window. Marcus had been there through the night, holding vigil alongside Maria as Emma's breathing gradually became more labored, and then finally ceased altogether. When the moment came, it was quiet and gentle, nothing like the violent deaths Marcus had witnessed on battlefields. Dr. Chen confirmed what everyone in the room already knew, speaking in the hushed, respectful tones reserved for such moments. The medical equipment that had sustained Emma for so many months was quietly turned off, leaving behind a silence that felt both profound and peaceful. Marcus stood by the window, looking out at the city beginning to wake up, completely unprepared for the tsunami of grief that crashed over him. For the first time since his military discharge, he found himself crying openly, tears flowing without restraint or shame. All the emotions he had suppressed for decades seemed to surface at once. Not just his grief for Emma, but sorrow for his fallen comrades, pain from his own trauma, regret for years of emotional isolation. Maria approached him quietly, her own face streaked with tears but her posture somehow still strong. She loved you very much, she said simply. In these last weeks you gave her something precious. You showed her that her father's lessons about courage and kindness were real, that there were still good men in the world who understood what honor truly meant. Marcus turned from the window, struggling to find words adequate for the moment. She saved me, he said finally, his voice broken. I didn't even know I needed saving, but she did. She taught me how to be human again. Over the following days, Marcus found himself in unfamiliar territory as he navigated his first experience with civilian grief. The military had prepared him for losing comrades in combat, with its rituals of honor guards and flag-draped coffins. But there were no protocols for mourning a 7-year-old girl who had become the most important person in his carefully ordered world. He attended Emma's funeral in his dress uniform, standing at attention as her small casket was carried into the church. The service was filled with people whose lives Emma had touched during her brief time on Earth, classmates who remembered her kindness, neighbors who had watched her play in the yard before she got sick, hospital staff who had been inspired by her courage. When Maria asked Marcus to speak, he found himself standing before the congregation, looking out at faces that expected words of comfort and wisdom. For a moment his old training kicked in, tempting him to deliver something formal and emotionally distant. But then he remembered his promise to Emma. Emma Rodriguez was the bravest soldier I ever met, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the church. She taught me that real courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about loving people so much that you're willing to be afraid for them. She faced every day with the kind of honor and determination that would make any military commander proud. Marcus paused, looking at Maria in the front row, finding strength in her encouraging nod. But more than that, he continued, Emma understood something that took me 23 years of military service to learn. She knew that the greatest battles aren't always fought with weapons on distant battlefields. Sometimes they're fought right here in hospital rooms and family homes, by ordinary people who choose to love each other despite knowing that love makes you vulnerable to the deepest kind of pain. After the funeral, Marcus made arrangements to fulfill Emma's final mission. Working with Maria and the hospital staff, he carefully distributed Emma's stuffed animal army to children throughout the pediatric wing. Each child received one of Emma's beloved companions along with a card explaining that this was a special guardian sent by a very brave girl who wanted them to know they weren't alone. The process of giving away Emma's animals forced Marcus to spend more time on the pediatric wing, and he began to notice things he had previously overlooked. There were other children facing impossible battles with the same courage Emma had shown. There were parents maintaining bedside vigils with the same determination Maria had displayed. There were families grappling with situations that made his own struggles seem manageable by comparison. For the first time since his military discharge, Marcus began to understand what his next mission might look like. He approached Dr. Chen a week after Emma's funeral with a proposal that surprised even him. "I'd like to expand my role here," he said. "Not just security, but working with families who are dealing with long-term care situations. I think I might be able to help." Dr. Chen studied him with interest. "What kind of help are you thinking about?" Marcus had been formulating this idea since Emma's death, trying to understand how he could honor her memory while using skills he had developed over years of military service. "Practical support," he explained. "Helping families navigate hospital systems, coordinating with insurance companies, organizing logistics for extended stays, and maybe just being present for people who need someone to understand that you can be strong and scared at the same time." It wasn't traditional therapy or medical care, but Dr. Chen recognized the value of what Marcus was offering. She had seen how his presence had affected not just Emma, but other patients and families who had observed their friendship. There was something powerful about his combination of military competence and newfound emotional openness. There would be training involved, Dr. Chen warned. Classes on family dynamics, child psychology, crisis intervention. Are you prepared for that kind of commitment? Marcus thought about Emma's unwavering dedication to her stuffed animal missions, her determination to complete 1,000-piece puzzles despite her weakness, her insistence on maintaining hope even when hope seemed impossible. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "I'm ready to learn." As Marcus began this new chapter of his life, he carried Emma's lessons with him like essential equipment for an ongoing mission. He learned to sit with grieving parents without trying to fix their pain, to play board games with scared children without worrying about productivity, to cry openly when situations called for tears without viewing those emotions as weakness. The transformation wasn't easy or immediate. There were days when his old patterns of emotional detachment tried to reassert themselves, moments when the intensity of other people's pain tempted him to retreat behind familiar barriers. But each time he felt himself pulling back, he remembered Emma's words about feelings being partners with courage, not enemies of it. 6 months after Emma's death, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the hospital. Maria Rodriguez appeared in his office doorway, carrying a wrapped package and wearing the first genuine smile he had seen from her since Emma's funeral. "I have something for you," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Emma made me promise to give this to you when I thought you were ready." Marcus unwrapped the package carefully, revealing Emma's red baseball cap and a handwritten note in her careful 7-year-old script. "For Mr. Marcus, remember that the best soldiers are the ones who protect people's hearts, not just their bodies. Love, your friend Emma." As Marcus held the cap, feeling its soft fabric and remembering the countless times he had seen it perched on Emma's head during their conversations, he realized that his transformation was complete. The man who had been trained to show no emotion had learned the most important lesson of all, that love, in all its vulnerable and painful glory, was not something to be feared or suppressed, but something to be embraced as the greatest strength any person could possess. 2 years later, Marcus Thompson stood in the same hospital corridor where he had first encountered Emma Rodriguez. But everything about him had changed. Gone was the rigid military posture and emotionally distant expression. In their place was a man who carried himself with quiet confidence, whose eyes showed warmth and genuine engagement with the world around him. He was no longer just the hospital's security supervisor. His business card now read Family Support Coordinator, a position the hospital had created specifically for him, after witnessing the remarkable impact he had on patients and their loved ones. The role combined his natural leadership abilities with the emotional intelligence Emma had helped him develop. Marcus had completed extensive training in grief counseling, family crisis intervention, and pediatric psychology. But more importantly, he had learned to trust the instincts Emma had awakened in him. The ability to recognize when someone needed practical help, when they needed someone to listen, or when they simply needed to know that they weren't facing their struggles alone. His office, once a sterile space containing only essential furniture and security monitors, now reflected his new role in life. The walls displayed children's artwork, gifted by grateful families, photographs of patients he had worked with over the years and prominently featured, Emma's lighthouse puzzle framed and mounted where he could see it every day. Her red baseball cap sat on his desk, a constant reminder of the promise he had made and kept. On this particular morning, Marcus was preparing for one of his favorite weekly activities, leading a support group for fathers whose children were undergoing long-term medical treatment. The group had started with just 3 men who struggled to express their fears and frustrations about their children's illnesses. Now it regularly included 15 to 20 fathers who had learned that strength came not from suffering in silence, but from sharing their burdens with others who understood their journey. "Gentlemen," Marcus began as the fathers settled into chairs arranged in a circle, "before we start today's discussion, I want to share something with you. Yesterday marked 2 years since I lost a very special friend who taught me everything I know about real courage." The men in the circle listened attentively. Most of them had heard Marcus reference Emma before, understanding that this child had somehow transformed him from an emotionally distant security guard into someone who could guide them through their darkest moments. "Emma Rodriguez was 7 years old when she died from cancer," Marcus continued. "But in the short time I knew her, she taught me that being a protector isn't just about standing guard against external threats. Sometimes it means protecting someone's spirit, their hope, their belief that tomorrow might be better than today." A father named David, whose 5-year-old son was fighting leukemia, raised his hand. "How do you do that when you're scared all the time yourself? How do you stay strong for your kid when you feel like you're falling apart inside?" Marcus smiled, remembering similar conversations with Emma about the relationship between fear and courage. "That's exactly the right question, David. Emma once told me that being scared and being brave aren't opposites, they're partners. You can't really be brave unless you're scared of something. The key is learning to carry both feelings at the same time." Over the next hour, Marcus facilitated a discussion that would have been impossible for him just 2 years earlier. The fathers talked openly about their fears, their guilt, their anger at the unfairness of their situations. But they also shared moments of joy, small victories, and the fierce love that motivated them to keep fighting alongside their children. After the group session ended, Marcus made his rounds through the pediatric wing. This wasn't a security patrol anymore, but a series of visits with families who had requested his support. He stopped by room 318, where 8-year-old Miguel was recovering from surgery while his parents struggled with insurance complications. "Any word from the insurance company?" Marcus asked Miguel's mother, Rosa, who was maintaining her constant bedside vigil. "They're saying the physical therapy isn't covered under our plan," Rosa replied, exhaustion evident in her voice. "But Miguel needs it to walk properly again. I don't know what we're going to do." Marcus pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts. Over the past 2 years, he had built a network of social workers, patient advocates, charitable organizations, and medical professionals who specialized in navigating complex healthcare situations. "Let me make some calls," he said. "There are programs available that most people don't know about. We'll figure this out." As Marcus worked on Miguel's case, he thought about how different his approach to problem-solving had become. Previously, he would have offered impersonal advice about proper channels and official procedures. Now he understood that families in crisis needed more than information. They needed someone willing to advocate for them, to make the system work on their behalf. His next stop was the playroom, where he had promised to meet Sarah, a 6-year-old girl whose parents had been killed in a car accident. Sarah was now being raised by her grandmother, while undergoing treatment for injuries sustained in the same crash. The combination of grief and physical pain had left her withdrawn and unresponsive to most adults. But Sarah had connected with Marcus, perhaps recognizing in him someone who understood that healing involved more than just medical treatment. They had developed a routine of building elaborate structures with blocks while talking about whatever was on her mind. Sometimes her parents, sometimes her fears about her injuries, sometimes just normal 6-year-old concerns about favorite colors and playground games. "Mr. Marcus," Sarah called out when she saw him enter the playroom. "I saved the blue blocks for our castle. Grandma said you might not have time today, but I told her you always keep your promises." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever a child expressed such trust in him. "That's right, Sarah, I always keep my promises. What kind of castle are we building today?" As they worked together, carefully placing blocks to create towers and walls, Sarah began talking about a dream she'd had about her parents. In the past, Marcus would have felt completely unequipped to handle such a conversation. Now, thanks to his training and Emma's teachings about the importance of simply being present for people in pain, he listened without trying to fix or explain away her grief. Sometimes I dream that Mommy and Daddy are still alive, Sarah said, concentrating on balancing a block on top of their tower. In the dreams, they're not hurt anymore and we're all together at home. When I wake up, I get sad because it wasn't real. Marcus continued building, understanding that children often found it easier to share difficult feelings when their hands were busy with other activities. Those dreams sound really special, Sarah. Even though they make you sad when you wake up, they're also a way for your heart to spend time with your parents. Sarah looked up at him with serious brown eyes that reminded him achingly of Emma. Do you think they know I miss them? I think they know exactly how much you love them, Marcus replied. And I think they're proud of how brave you're being while your body gets better. Later that afternoon, Marcus attended a staff meeting where Dr. Chen presented data showing significant improvements in patient satisfaction and family coping strategies since the family support program had been implemented. The statistics were impressive, but Marcus knew the real measure of success couldn't be captured in numbers. The real success was in moments like watching David find the courage to cry in front of other fathers who understood his pain. It was in Rosa's relief when insurance barriers were removed and Miguel could get the therapy he needed. It was in Sarah's growing ability to talk about her parents without being overwhelmed by grief. As Marcus drove home that evening, he stopped at a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. Emma's grave was marked by a simple headstone adorned with a small American flag in honor of her father's military service. Someone, probably Maria, had left fresh flowers and a small stuffed elephant, one of Emma's favorites that had apparently found its way back to her. Marcus knelt beside the grave, something he did every month without fail. Hey, Emma, he said quietly. I wanted to give you an update on the mission. He told her about the fathers who had learned to support each other, about families who had navigated impossible situations and emerged stronger, about children who had discovered that healing involved more than just medical treatment. He shared his own continued growth, the ways he was still learning to balance strength with vulnerability, competence with compassion. I kept my promise, he said finally. I didn't go back to hiding my feelings. Some days it's still hard, but I remember what you taught me. That the world needs people who care deeply, especially when caring hurts. As the sun began to set, Marcus placed a small lighthouse figurine next to Emma's headstone, a tradition. He had started to honor their shared love of puzzles and her belief that some people were meant to be guiding. Lights for others navigating stormy waters. Walking back to his car, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him from an emotionally isolated security guard to someone who could help families find hope in their darkest moments. Emma had been right about so many things, but perhaps most importantly, she had understood that true strength wasn't about eliminating emotions or vulnerability. Real strength, Marcus had learned, came from having the courage to love deeply despite knowing that love would sometimes lead to loss, to care about others despite the risk of being hurt, and to remain open to human connection, even when that openness required a kind of bravery that no military training could provide. The man who had been trained to show no emotion had become someone who helped others understand that emotions, all of them, even the painful ones, were not weaknesses to be overcome but essential parts of what made life meaningful. And every day as he helped families navigate their own battles with fear and hope, Marcus carried Emma's memory forward, ensuring that her lessons about courage, love, and the strength found in vulnerability would continue to change lives long after her own brief but extraordinary journey had ended.